Hello, fellow Starfleet officers. I'm, as always, your celebration captain, Sidaris. Since we're in the middle of the Star Trek September, I'm very happy to announce another guest, Tryptic, the mastermind behind the tactical maneuver mod for Star Trek Armada 2. Hello there, how are you doing?
Hey there, glad to be here.
It's always a pleasure to talk to other Star Trek fans and other modders. But before we go into the real meat, I also would like to know, who are you basically? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably for my generation, it's a relatively common story. I wanted to be a video game designer when I was younger. I really wanted to. And then around the time I was getting into college, I was learning how terrible of a job it is because of how much competition, there's 10 guys who want to make video games for every person who actually gets to do it. So I ended up going another route and becoming a network engineer. But over the years, I realized I could still do this as a hobby. And Star Trek itself has always had a very active, nerd communities. So this was the game that I ended up choosing. I've played a lot of RTS and strategy games over the years. So this was probably the perfect fit. I grew up with, StarCraft, Warcraft 3, Supreme Commander, all of those games.
Of course, since we have the Star Trek September, I'm also very curious, how did you get into Star Trek?
Honestly, it's a bit hard to tell looking back. I was thinking about this because you had mentioned this was a good question before, and I had to really think about it. I think the generations today don't really understand what it was like back then. You had TV shows on TV, and they would come out one episode every week, and it would be Friday at 8 p.m. or something, and that would be when the new episode of Star Trek Voyager would air that no one had ever seen before. So I was actually around it for a while, just as a kid. The Next Generation would be on TV when my mom would be watching TV, or, it would just be on in the background, and I never knew what it was until I got older. And then, I discovered LimeWire, and I downloaded all of Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and just went on a massive marathon watching them. It's a really fantastic universe.
It totally is. It totally is. But there has to be, of course, the follow-up question. What is your favorite?
I mean, I think the Next Generation still holds it all together for me, because they were just introducing, you look at it now and it just makes sense. You're like, oh yeah, that's Star Trek. And it's easy to forget that when the Next Generation aired, they were making up a lot of this stuff on the spot. Most of this lore didn't exist before that show. I think Deep Space Nine had a better sense of humor and honestly better wartime scenes. But the Next Generation really was the classic.
And at some point, I guess you also went into the Star Trek gaming experience. What was there your first contact?
Oh man, I hadn't done very much, but actually Star Trek gaming was around for a very long time. I think I thought about it once again. When I was a little kid, I had a CD that was 1,000 freeware games. And I just would play through these random DOS, super basic little games. And one of them, you were just it was really basic, ASCII, the graphics are periods and underscores, and you had a little spaceship and you had to manage your energy levels and your health. And I didn't even know until later that it was a Star Trek game because I say, there were so many Star Trek nerds in the early days of computers. But then Armada 2 was actually the first, full game that I played. A friend of my dad just gave him the CD and ended up playing it with a friend, and that was, I'd already discovered fleet operations. Fleet operations already existed within 1 or 2 years of the release, way back in, that would have been 2002. The modding community was ready and they leaped on it.
You got into the golden age of Star Trek gaming a little bit late. I think I thought you would have played everything from the beginning. So you have a totally different view to it.
I mean, if 2002 can be considered late. Yeah, I mean...
Well, 2003 was the last release of a good Star Trek game, more or less.
I mean, it definitely changed, that's for sure. I think the Armada games were, yeah, they were very classic, and also they were cutting edge. It is true. Like after that, they didn't make so many Star Trek games that were on the very cutting edge of the technology.
And how was your opinion about Armada 1? Most people played, of course, 1 and then the second part, but since you did the other way, I'm curious about that.
I actually have I did go back and play it years later to see what it was like. I had played, because I played Fleet Operations before I even played Armada 2. So it was more recently I went back and played through all the Armada 2 campaigns, and I played a little bit of Armada 1. I think, a lot of these games are, what's the word? They're pioneers. So like they were fantastic for when they were. They may not still be good by today's standards. And I see that way. Like Armada 1 was incredibly good for its time. Kind of the same as like Warcraft 2. I think today we can do a whole lot better, but I love the fact that it exists, right? And that the entire code base for the game is tiny, Like a college student today could slap together that game in like 3 weeks. But back then it was such an accomplishment.
It's sad that you say that, in the sense of we don't get any RTS titles anymore. It's so rare that we get a release, and then it's a release like Homeworld 3, where it's very archaic, like pisses off a lot of the fan base.
It really is sad, right? Like you don't have the vision that people used to have to just make a simple and good game.
Yeah, totally. Since you work in the network department, I'm curious what you also say about the multiplayer of Armada 1 and 2. Why it's such a mess, maybe? Can you give me an answer about this very old question in the Armada community?
I mean, Netcode was, back then, it was just such a low priority. I mean, partly because it was changing, right? If you wrote, it didn't make that big of a difference if you wrote really good netcode, because it was all going to be different in like a year or two. StarCraft 1 has like IPX support, for multiplayer. That doesn't exist anymore. It's gone.
It's funny that you say that. The Armada community more and more uses now IPX as the standard protocol for Armada 1 multiplayer rounds.
Right. Yes, 20 years later, it came back around because now we're at the point that it's easier to make a fake old network than it is to get, Armada to working on new networks. Yeah, it was crazy back then, If you got together with friends for a LAN party and you were all in the same room, and because you were all college students desperate to play video games with each other, like it still might not work. People don't know what it's like to invite like 5 friends over for a LAN party and not be able to connect your games, and then just like hang around chatting and maybe playing single player with each other because you couldn't get it to work. Like back then, when you got your computer, and for me it was like Total Annihilation, I think was the one. Like when I got my Total Annihilation game to actually start and connect with my friend, it was a magic moment. It was amazing. So like part of the thing about the multiplayer for these games is, if you want to know, the answer is it never worked that well. We just have, rose-colored glasses looking back because, we were young and it was beautiful. Like, no, it didn't work for us back then either.
But on the same side, we really have to say it's also a very big advantage to have this TCP/IP, IPX protocols, because now we have left and right games who are dying after 1 or 2 years after the release, and nobody wants to pay for the servers anymore.
Oh, yeah.
If you have a game like Armada, you don't care. You can play it via a VPN. You have a real LAN party. You have so many options. Those games basically will never die, which we can't say about today's title.
Yeah, VPNs and LAN emulators and programs like Game Ranger are just amazing. Yeah, they do so much for these old games.
Yesterday, my co-host asked me, why do I personally still play Armada 1? And I told him, well, there is no other game which gives me this extensive tension, that amazing feeling to never know, will my game get out of sync or not. It's so special. You will never have this in any other game, basically.
Well, I mean, you can, but when it happens in a modern game, you just get annoyed.
Let me rephrase it. Today, basically the game is really crap, or the infrastructure behind it is the problem. For example, the EA client is really, really strange. Back then, it was just the netcode. Just one simple factor. Now it's many factors.
Yeah. And you can't solve the problem by emulating like you can with the older games.
Yeah, especially in the sense of in-game browsers. You nowadays only have a matchmaking system, and the god of matchmaking will decide what game mode you will play. But yeah, moving on to your area of expertise a little bit more in the Star Trek community. What is Fleet Ops tactical maneuvers? I guess not so many people know about it. Can you give me a short summary?
Wow. Tactical maneuvers is my update to fleet operations. Basically, fleet operations development continued until 2013, and then the team moved on to another project, which has had its own history. But at first, no one really wanted to touch it because they were like, it was pretty good in its final state. But then after a few years, I would, once again, I'd always wanted to be a game designer, and I was like, I mean, here it is. And I knew a little about it because I'd been around. We would help test new versions, and we would provide feedback because it was a very close-knit community. The devs were there and they'd listen to every bit of feedback. So after a couple years, I was like, I can make some changes. And there was like one ship that was underpowered, and I made it stronger. And I was like, there you go. And then from there, I kept on working on it for, it's been over 10 years now, I guess. About 10 years. So tactical maneuvers is meant to be like an ongoing development of fleet operations. I'm not part of the original mod team, but that is the intention. I decided that it would be inappropriate to call it Fleet Operations Expanded or something, so I just gave it its own name. And so I mechanically, I've made a lot of like AI improvements. I've got some engine improvements, which came from another modder. I've got some graphics improvements, which came from another modder. I've got like a lot of new mechanics that I've added or simplified to make more streamlined. Like I've added command ships, which give bonuses to nearby allies, stuff like that.
You already touched the subject a little bit. When exactly did you start with the project?
I want to say 2015, and it was honestly because the Dederidex Warbird was too weak, and we still played multiplayer quite a lot back then. So I was like, if I just made another version of this where I made the Dederidex a bit stronger, would that, would people play that? And people were like, yeah, we haven't had an update in 2 years now. And I was like, sure. And I sat down, and I think I sat there for 15 hours straight. And I just changed like a few things here and there. So yeah, I've been doing this since 2015 now, and it just makes a really nice hobby. Was it your first try to get into modding, or did you mod something else before? This is the first game I've modded. I mean, I went to college for computer programming, so I understand a lot of these things, but this is really the first time I've applied it to anything other than writing Python scripts for work. And you totally work alone on the project, or do you have help from the community? So I work alone. Well, we have sort of a dev cluster, I guess you could say, where each of us has our own mod that we work on, but we also share content quite a lot. So like I designed the AI improvements, which the other guys now use. The one guy, Drazon, did the graphics updates, which then several of the others use. We take stuff, and like say Jan B's engine upgrades, we all started using. So I'm a solo developer for this mod, but I'm sharing content with a lot of other guys. Oh, that's good to hear that you guys work together on that. Especially Yambi's Fleet Ops route is a big improvement to the engine. Yeah. We didn't have anybody who could get into the executable for many years, and then when he finally dove into it, he started getting some really good improvements for us. So I guess you also didn't have the opportunity to talk really to the original Fleet Ops developers. They sadly disappeared a few years ago. Yeah, it's a matter of how should I, like, you need to keep a fair amount of the code in your head as you're working on it. And so because the Fleet Ops devs have moved on to a new code base, it would be difficult for them to work on the Armada 2 code base again, because it would just confuse with the stuff that they have now. So yeah, they haven't been super present for a while. Like I say, I understand they are still working on their other project, but it's become a very long-term, slow burn project for them.
It's unbelievable how long this other project is in the work. I'm not sure if they're still working on it. I tried to contact them a few times in the past to join us for discussions, interviews, stuff like that, and they never even replied.
Yeah, they had a bit of a rough run of it. The short version is they teamed up with another team who were making a game engine. So the other team were making a game engine at the same time that they were making fleet operations. And then that way they could give each other feedback and work together. My understanding is the team that was working on the game engine kind of stopped working, or fell apart a bit, which left the fleet ops devs with a half-finished engine and a half-finished mod, and that was really rough on them. So yeah, they have been pretty quiet, but I don't hold it against them or anything. Life happens.
That's totally true. We are very happy to have fleet ops in general. Amazing product they put out, but the big problem for me is that they keep a lot of information for themselves. For example, if I'm not mistaken, the multiplayer is still broken in fleet operations if you use the GOG version.
Oh, I mean, it'll still require a CD.
We didn't experience that problem. We experienced the problem that we couldn't join each other's games.
Oh, really?
If you use the disk version, it works without a problem. We used the disk for now 23 years, without any hassle. And if you use the GOG version, we couldn't get it to run last year. I haven't touched it this year. I didn't use Jan B's version, so maybe he fixed it, or some changes fixed it in the background.
Yeah, I think after all of these years, fleet operations is getting harder to run now compared to like tactical maneuvers and routes. And that was something like, say, Jan B, he made the installer, and then he shared his code with me, so I was able to make my installer. So you just have to download the installer and run the program, instead of with fleet operations, you still have to go back and like copy some files over and rename files and do some stuff. So yes, we've been trying to make it easier for people to get into, because for a lot of people it can be super intimidating to go try to get this 23-year-old game to work. But if anything, it's easier to use now than it was 5 years ago.
That's true. The GOG release is such a blessing for the Star Trek community, the Star Trek gaming community. But yeah, I would have liked a little bit more information, a little bit more archiving of the information from the developers of fleet operations. We also never got from them basically a widescreen fix for Star Trek Armada 2. Some random guy, many moons later, finally fixed that problem. Would have been much easier if we just had a little bit of background information, what magic they used for fleet ops, so we could help them and even create more amazing stuff.
Yeah, and honestly, the whole community is kind of funny that way, because there are a lot of people on like the edge of the community, the borders, who they've stopped modding years ago, but every once in a while they might just remember, oh hey, fleet operations, and they'll just come back and do some stuff, and contribute to the community and add something, and then disappear again for a couple years. But that's kind of nice. Like, we have that legacy. So sometimes, as long as we maintain the Discord server, every once in a while someone will just show up and do some modding and help us out, which is pretty cool.
Definitely, that's a big benefit here, having this big Discord community. But since maybe you heard it from me, I'm very big in archiving information. So I'm always a little bit scared about Discords, because they are gated. You can't find them really by a search. And if there is a big fallout, it gets deleted. Stuff can be really easy be lost, basically.
Yeah, it is important to have resilience in your files, like, random people with random copies who, if some main site goes down, people could then just share the copies that they have.
In the chat, Chris comments, he's the developer of the Elite Force 2 co-op mod. Will there ever be a zipped version of the mod? Currently it's only an installer.
Will there ever be a what version of it?
A compressed version, basically, where you just have a zip file.
Oh, I see. So I believe you can just use the installer and then save it as a zip and then, move that around and it will work. Basically, for legal reasons, I can't make one. Like that's a big thing. And it's like the people who own Star Trek aren't going to come sue us, right? But the people like GOG do own the game now. So like we can't provide versions that would basically get around that, because that would be, intellectual property theft. And like, even though someone, they really might not care, and they might even be in a situation where like us sharing the mod actually increases their sales of it, so like they don't actually mind, it still is a sticking point. And like, we had two people get into a disagreement a while back, and one of them like went to ModDB and reported that the other person was, basically stealing by providing a full version of the game, which is against ModDB's rules. And they had to launch an investigation, and the guy proved that he was not actually doing that. So for various reasons, like, I'm not going to tell you not to have a zipped version. I'm just going to say I can never host a zipped version, because that would be against the rules.
Yeah, and it would be a shame if projects like this will be shut down because of some stupid legal reason.
Yeah, because like even the original Fleet Ops devs, they knew that CD cracks existed, but they were not able to tell anyone. They couldn't tell it. Like if you asked for a CD crack, they had to kick you off their website because that could get them in trouble. But like they also knew that a bunch of us were using them.
Like the entire industry does.
Yeah.
But of course we have to say, yeah, don't use that stuff. It's dangerous.
Yeah, exactly.
And also from Chris comes, the Armada community is fairly huge for a Star Trek gaming community. Would you say that's true, or would you say...
So what I would say is, the thing about the Star Trek community is it never dies. Like I mentioned before, like, because a lot of guys who are in their 30s and 40s now played this when they were younger, and they have fond memories of it, they can always come back. So, the number of people who are active at any given time are kind of low, but you constantly see people come back and say, hey, I used to play this 5 years ago. I'm coming back. And so there's a massive number of people out there who have played Star Trek Armada 1, 2, Fleet Operations, who will come back sometimes and be like, hey guys, how's it going? I played this in high school. And like they never actually go away. So for that reason, I think the extended Star Trek community is very big.
I guess you had a big push after the re-release on GOG.
Yes, that also helped quite a lot, because before it was a $100 CD.
Yeah, and most people back then didn't have a CD drive.
Yeah, we're getting to that point now. Yeah, they don't sell them with CD drives anymore.
Yeah, and of course, getting the content of the CD to an ISO, which you can then transfer to your NAS or so, it's for us tech novice guys, pro guys, whatever, a little bit easier than to a completely noob who doesn't know anything about that.
Yeah, that was actually a really big topic, like that was on my mind just like a year ago, because when Jad made his installer, and I was like, because I looked at it and I was like, well, if anyone has trouble installing my mod, they can always come on the Discord and ask me. And I had to realize, well, no, like, just because I've been doing this for 8 years now and it's easy for me doesn't mean that a brand new person is comfortable, installing all these things. We really got to make it easier. And I think we've done a lot of that. We have made it a lot easier to install these mods just in the past couple of years. Like, if a person just wants to try this out, you just buy Armada 2 on Good Old Games, and you download a single file off of ModDB, for tactical maneuvers, and there's another single file for routes, and like you can get playing within 15 minutes if you move quickly.
It's totally true that it's, again, a little bit easier for the novice, but it also was very easy back then, where you just had to copy a folder to another folder. Star Trek Bridge Commander was much more complicated in the sense you needed a certain tool to integrate ships and special tools to have even multiplayer available in modding. It was very complicated, but for Armada it luckily was always easy.
Yeah, well, and these days I think the installer is still pretty safe, because these days if you copy paste it, sometimes your operating system or like your virus scanner will block it or will delete some of the files.
That's true. That's totally true. Yeah. But of course, we know how to basically tell the antivirus scanner to basically shut up. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Talking again, of course, about your mod, I'm also very curious. What are your plans for the future?
Oh boy. I have way more plans than I have time. So I'll probably be working on this forever. I would like to add a full campaign, a full like 4 campaigns similar to what Roots has done. And that is probably coming up, because right now I've still been, oh boy. So I go through cycles, right? Where a cycle would be like I introduce new code and it does something new, but then it also adds a whole bunch of bugs. And then I have to go through fixing those bugs. And then when I'm done fixing those bugs, I go through another addition cycle. So right now I'm in a bug fixing cycle that's lasted quite a while. I'm just about done. So when I fix all these bugs, the next thing I'd like to do is start working on campaign missions and getting more of that stuff going. And someday I have a plan for a Cardassian faction as the 6th race, but I would probably do the campaign before that. So yeah, I'll be doing this for a while. Like it might go slow sometimes, but yeah, I'll be adding quite a lot of stuff in the future.
I find it so interesting that for many years now we had fleet operations and many other mods in Star Trek Armada 1 and 2, and we rarely got a single player experience. And now there are a few mods in development who focus on only that, not on only that, but focus on that also. It's so nice to see that finally.
Yeah, my focus was multiplayer for a very long time, because those were the guys I was playing with. Those were the guys I knew. And every time I worked on AI, they'd be like, why are you working on the single player? Like, you're taking time away from fixing bugs. But then I eventually realized, because I was looking at the number of people who say hi in the Discord, but I was also looking at the number of people who download the mod. And I was like, there's a lot more people who download this and just play single player than there are online. I should really help out those people. And actually, that's, of the things that I've done with Tactical Maneuvers, that's the one that I am the most proud of, is the AI enhancements. Because their game it has rock, paper, scissors in it. It has some ships that beat other ships. But the base game and even fleet operations don't support multiple AIs. So there's only one AI build list, and it always builds the same ships every time. And it's like, you can't really have a good game of rock, paper, scissors when the computer always chooses rock. But then I eventually realized a way where I was able to change what it builds based on an invisible pod, and I was able to spawn a random invisible pod. And so after several years of working on this, I put together this janky system where at the start of every game, the AI chooses a random build list. And that way I could have it be a whole lot more like the way players play, because a human being just builds 20 galaxies and rolls over you. But the original AI, they wanted it to build a couple of different ships, so it had a variety, so you got to see stuff because it only had one thing. Well, now I was able to make it so the AI, it randomly selects. So sometimes the AI does build 20 galaxies, but sometimes it builds small ships, or sometimes it builds a bunch of Excelsior 2s or something. And so I think just the AI randomly changing what it does has made the single player, at least for me, way more fun and engaging, because you could build the wrong ship against the AI and you could build the right ship. And if you start out, you can't just go into every game planning to do the exact same strategy, because the AI might randomly choose to do something that beats you and you have to change it up.
That's so true. That was always so annoying in vanilla Armada 1 and 2 that you really know what to expect. At the same time, I wonder, does this mean the AI isn't also that stubborn anymore, in the sense of, I really want to get a mining station at this asteroid, and I really have to do that, no matter what happens.
I mean, it's pretty determined. Like, it will give up eventually. And actually, that's interesting because I can work with the build lists of the AI and like tell it how much it needs to expand. But then Jan B has been doing the actual engine changes, where like how the AI chooses priorities and like how often it changes its mind and stuff like that. So between the two of us, I think it's getting better over time. There are also just some maps that the AI struggles with. Like, you can design a map that will really confuse the AI. But like bigger and simpler maps, the AI tends to do a lot better for.
Yeah, of course, the limitations of AI is a big problem in any game, so we can't really hold that against Armada.
Well, and it was interesting because a couple years back, we had some really interesting discussions between several modders. It was like Janby and me and like Admiral Nat, because we were trying to make the AI smarter, and we did. But it was less, like, we made the AI smarter in a specific way that I thought was less fun to play against. Because, like, the AI, like, if you started countering it, it could change, and theoretically anyway, it could change what it was building to counter you. But then I was like, but this isn't how human beings play. Like, our human players aren't this smart. They usually just stick to what they're doing. And I finally realized that making the AI smarter was not the same thing as making the AI fun to play against. And we actually, in a couple ways, we made the AI dumber, but way more fun to play against and way more realistic to the way that a human being plays. And it was just a really eye-opening thing for me. I was like, I'm not just trying to make this AI smart. I'm trying to make this AI play like a player and be fun to play against.
That sounds really amazing. Can't wait to dive deeper into your mods. I played it many hours already, but I'm still on the noob level here. But this really motivates to get deeper into it.
Yeah, I really want to make like my own guides and more videos. I just, I don't have as much time to spend on it these days as I used to.
There's also a very important question from Chris again. Does the AI still love asteroids and that they are basically stuck in them?
So that depends on the map design. Like, I could explain so deep. Basically, there are ways to make the map in the map editor that can confuse the AI, and there are other ways that will not. And so sometimes when I have some spare time, I go through and I like clean up maps. So like when you open tactical maneuvers, like at the top of the list, there are maps that have like numbers next to them, and that's the number of players. Those are the ones that I've gone through and I've cleaned them up so that they shouldn't confuse the AI and the AI shouldn't get stuck in asteroids. But like, that's like you got to check every single map, and you got to know what causes the AI to get hung up, and you got to fix it. So that's like an ongoing project. Maybe someday I'll have fixed every map.
Yeah, the ongoing battle against AI and pathfinding in RTS games will never die. Since you mentioned the one thing you're most proud of, I also would like to know the other side. Is there anything you're not that proud of that you couldn't maybe include even because the game engine couldn't handle it or was just too complicated?
There have been a few things over the years. I've usually had to change my mind, which is why like I don't remember them so well. Honestly, I wish that there were some better aura effects in the engine, because it's a very new engine. So for example, like the command passives. In tactical maneuvers, you have command ships and they give a rate of fire bonus to your nearby allies. I would have preferred to give them like a defense bonus to your nearby allies, but I wasn't able to do that the way I wanted in the engine, so it had to be an attack bonus. Similarly, I wanted to make it so that moons had a set amount of resources in them, and then after you mine that out, you mine slower from them from then on, but the engine had some issues with that. So there have been a few things over the years I've had to give up on, or they've just changed slightly. I really wish the game had better mechanics for increasing and decreasing speed. Like, I wish I had the ability to have like a ship that speeds up your other ships nearby, but the code is not good for that.
But in general, I find it very impressive that you included this capital ship bonus. Really nice to see that. Especially it reminds me so a lot of Star Trek Online, where you also had that kind of effect.
Oh yeah, the code behind this game is extremely janky. And that's why I love it, because we made, like, even the original developers made this engine do so many things it was not designed to do. Like Armada 2, they have stretched it so hard. So like, the command bonus is not actually an aura. It's just that the command ship fires an invisible weapon that every 3 seconds it fires an invisible weapon that increases your rate of fire for 3 seconds. And it just does this constantly. Like that's how I had to make that command passive work. And there's so many things in the game that, like, if someone explained to you how they actually work, you'd be like, oh, that's so weird.
Yeah, definitely. I love those little details, how stuff is working behind the scenes. I totally see how you're doing it, but I would have never guessed it would work that way.
Yeah, and like a lot of these things, I just had to work on this for years before it even occurred to me.
Chris sends basically a positive message about the pod AI. He's amazed about it. It sounds for him simply genius.
Honestly, I was pretty proud when I first thought of it. I came back to the modding group and I was like, guys, what if we just randomly dropped a pod and we broke the build list up into multiple sections? And they were like, but I think the build list is capped at like 5 lists. And I was like, is it? And then we found out there's no limit on how many tech levels you can have. So yeah, it was a very exciting time.
Chris just wrote something in the chat, and I also wanted to know that, but I'm not entirely sure how I should phrase that. But how would you say is the community in general? Is it a lot of drama, a lot of fighting, or are people in general very happy and polite to each other?
I mean, the community, there's several parts of the community. There are people who play multiplayer together and have good times. Like, there's actually the Armada Reddit Discord, and they have the VPN server that they host. There is a specific group of people who play Fleet Operations multiplayer who have been playing it for many, many years. And they all have known each other for like 15 years now. And they get pretty rowdy sometimes. And so a little while back, we had a disagreement where I was like, guys, you can't call new people the C word. And they were like, well, why not? I've been here for so long and this is where I come to relax. And I was like, guys, no, like you can't do that. And so they went off and created their own server where they still play sometimes. Like, so they do get like 6-player games on weekends sometimes. Those guys, they treat it like it's their bar, basically, like it's the pub that they go to unwind. And so they can be a little bit aggressive towards new people. They're not the only ones you can play with. There are plenty of friendly people who they'll play single player, or they'll just find someone else and they'll play 2 people against AI. And I think other groups sort of crop up sometimes, just like groups of friends who don't even like advertise on the Discord. But you can find people, like if you try hard enough, you'll be able to find people who are friendly and still playing this game. And I'm hoping to get a lot more of them in the future. Like I say, because the game has been so buggy, Tactical Maneuver specifically has been really buggy for a while. I haven't felt so good about advertising it. But once I get the bugs fixed, I really want to advertise more on Reddit and places like here and get more people involved in it again.
To be honest, I didn't feel it that buggy. I played for around 4-6 hours and didn't have any big problems.
Honestly, the current version, which I want to say is 5.05, is the most stable version I've put out in like 2 or 3 years now. So it's getting better, for sure.
Yeah, coming slowly to a close, what would you like in a new official Star Trek game? What would basically be your dream game?
Honestly, I think there's a lot of room for like indie Star Trek games, which we haven't seen recently. Like even, like Bridge Commander. Like someone could just make a new Bridge Commander, and I think it would be like people would really enjoy it and it would be really fun. Not like a big AAA experience, but just more of these old things. And like obviously Armada 2 is an older style now of RTS. Like they don't really make RTS games like this anymore. But they could, I mean, someone could make just like a really similar to Armada 2 with the campaign of like 30 missions and people would love it. I don't think that's going to happen, but I don't think there's a lot of room for like really big fancy Star Trek games right now. But I would love to see more indie, smaller projects just pop up everywhere.
To be honest, it doesn't need to be the biggest project on the block. We don't need another MMO. Something small like, another RTS, another Bridge Commander. Just use the already existing ideas and improve on it.
Well, and I will say this, Star Trek Online has produced a ton of high-res models, which is really nice. Because, like, some of the fleet operations models we have now were taken from Star Trek Online, I believe. I'd have to go check. But, like, the fact that those models exist, and you'd have to get them licensed properly, right? But, like, the fact that those models exist makes it so much easier for indie people or, like, small modding teams to make really good mods. Because that was always the hardest part back in the day, was getting good spaceship models, because they're a lot of work. Since Sins of a Solar Empire 2 came out recently, and the development team who made Star Trek Armada 3 for Sins of a Solar Empire 1, they have announced their new project, which is Star Trek Armada 4, which is a mod for Sins of a Solar Empire 2, and they're getting started on that. But I say a lot of the spaceship models, some of them just come from community members who just felt like making a Star Trek spaceship. But a lot of them come from like Star Trek Online, which is amazing. It's great. You can get those and you can use them, because that just makes it easier for people to make what they, people with creative ideas who can't make models. It lets them do what they want to do.
I definitely don't want to poo-poo on Star Trek Online. I really love the passion of the development team and the content in general. I just think the last few years go in a little bit strange direction. But in general, they did such an amazing work, and I love how close they, at some point at least, were to the community and how much they work together and listen to the feedback.
I didn't say it was a good game or that it has good stories or that the gameplay was good, but they have very good spaceship models.
To be honest, I think the story is much better compared to the recent shows we got. The latest episodes they produced are really not my flavor. I don't like multiverse. I don't like an overuse of the Borg, and that they don't do anything about the power creep. Basically, I'm playing the game since launch, and basically I can kill everything in a few seconds. There's a Borg cube, no sweat, no problem. That's really a bad thing, but at least really think they are totally Star Trek nerds. They know the lore, they respect it, they included a ton of voice actors. It's really, really good content in that sense, and big heads off there. But I wouldn't even have dreamed of that you could use their models in any way, that you could extract the models. Really, really nice.
Oh yeah, you can it's expensive depending on where you go, but you can get a Star Trek Online model and like go to a 3D printing company and like get prints, like an actual physical model of some of these ships, and they're glorious. I spent some time, I haven't done this, but I own a 3D printer as like a hobby, and I spent some time, like I printed out a Valdor Warbird that someone online had done, but I don't know if they actually ripped the model out of a game somewhere or if they made it themselves. But it's really cool what you can do with these models these days.
I remember back then they had the in-game option, or at least a tool that you can put out your own starship in Star Trek Online, what you customize basically, and get a 3D print. Is this still an option? Can you still get that?
I don't know. I haven't heard of it officially from them, but maybe it is.
I really have to check that, yeah. Then basically I would say we just read a few of the comments from the chat. We have the question, what do you basically think about Armada 2, the engine in general? Is there still a lot of potential left? Stuff which is basically unexplored? Stuff like the pod AI?
I mean, I would say there's not a whole lot left. Like, creativity springs eternal. Like, I can keep coming up with ideas. But the fact of the matter is, You can do better. Like there is one guy who said about like rebuilding it in Unity, and he's gotten pretty far. So like I will still be working with the Armada 2 engine, and like if anyone wanted to help me out, I'd be like, sure, like I can teach you the ropes. But also we're just about hitting the point where like you could make this in Unity like almost easier than you can make it in Armada 2 because it's been, you know, what, 23 years now.
Well, at least we had a big developer break from the modding community between, I would say, 2010 and 2020. There were just a few single people who developed something. Now we have a lot again.
Yeah, and like a company has to look at what's going to actually make money, right? And I think there's a lot of room for lightweight companies of like 5 people to make a game like that and make money. However, they would struggle to get the license for Star Trek. So it's a bit difficult right now, which is funny because I think the Star Trek license holders should just allow people to license games for cheaper or for free, like what the Warhammer 40K people did. You know, that a couple years ago, Warhammer 40K just said literally anybody can make a video game set in the Warhammer 40K universe. And after they did, there was a huge slew of like small indie Warhammer 40K games, and most of them were really bad, but some of them were amazing. And so, man, I would love to see that. If they just like opened up the license more to indie development, I think we would, in a heartbeat, we would see like 10 more games come out from like teams of 3 people.
Yeah, that subject about companies want to make money. It's interesting that so often they leave basically money on the table. It would be amazing if Paramount would say, anybody out there who wants to make a game, please do so, contact us, we will help you, we just want your basic work. Stuff like Stage 9, this amazing project, was just killed by them without any real reason, except that, hey, we developed Star Trek Bridge Crew, a tech demo for VR, and we don't like competition.
Yeah, they have a different mentality over there.
And for so many years we couldn't even buy Star Trek Armada 1, 2, Bridge Commander, Elite Force, and now it's there, and hey, there are still people who buy it for the first time, and even old guys like us who rebuy it.
Oh yeah, because actually guys who come back, they're in their 30s and 40s, they'll spend $10 for this easy. Like, they don't even think about it. That's the cost of a burrito these days.
Yeah, especially during the sales. My co-host also comments that the companies don't want substandard games. That's also true, but if they would test the waters out there, what the community tries in their mods, maybe they could weed out the crappy ones and the good ones. Star Trek Armada 3 and maybe 4 in the future totally prove that there's a lot of potential out there. Star Trek New Horizons is one of the best Star Trek experience you can have on the planet, I would say, so they should maybe get in touch with a few developers.
I find that quality control argument a little bit funny, obviously, because they're like, oh, we don't want you releasing content that's going to lower the quality of Star Trek. And then they made Discovery.
Yeah.
Like,
So I guess you're not a big fan of Discovery.
No, I'm really not.
But I don't want to end this video on such a bad mood about Star Trek Discovery. I also would maybe like to know something about your personal history, in the sense what you learned during this many years of development. What great memories do you have?
Oh boy, well, there's so many things, honestly. Like, I think I did this the best way, because I mentioned I wanted to be a game designer, but then I ended up becoming an engineer and doing this as my hobby, and I really think this was the best way to go, because being a game designer would have been such a stressful life. And when I need to take a break, I can just take a break for like a month or two and then come back, and there's no stress about it. I've learned a lot about what people want out of a game that I wouldn't have expected. Like I mentioned, like with sometimes making the AI smarter made it less fun to play against. Similarly, I did things that were more fair and balanced, because I compared the game to StarCraft 2 a lot. And like I would do things that would speed up the game. They would make things happen faster. And sometimes the players really didn't like that. They felt like it made it too high stress. if you had the ability to rush down your opponent in like 6 or 7 minutes, they'd be like, oh, that's just stressful. That's just tryharding. Like I don't like it. And I had to realize that's part of why like Age of Empires 2 is doing so well. I think strategy games in general got kind of faster and faster and faster and tighter and like esports style. And that actually stressed out quite a lot of people. And that's why a lot of people went back and played Age of Empires 2 and like old Age of Mythology, is because people don't actually want a super tight, balanced experience all the time. Sometimes they want to relax and they want to explore with their spaceships. And so I've definitely done things in the game design that I did not expect I would do, like I say, like slowing things down, making things weaker, making things that I felt weren't as fair, but like they were just more fun for people. And it was like, okay, like, that's what it is.
Seven Saturn says something very true. There's basically no one size fits all in terms of game speed in general. And continuing in that direction, I also have to ask you now, how did you feel about the game speed in Armada 2 compared to Armada 1? I, as a vanilla old school guy in Armada 1, I hated the transition of the speed in Armada 2, especially the warp drive. It felt so strange.
I think it is interesting because it really does make it a different game. Like, even if you can, because you can play Armada 2 with warp disabled, and it's a very different game. Or you could play on a map, because the maps allow for gravity wells on planets that prevent warping. Like if you're playing on a map that just doesn't let people warp around because there's like planetary barriers, it's a very different game. I think back in 2001, warp drive was a very clever experiment, and I'm glad they experimented with it. But I think in general, I like the slower gameplay. And that is definitely a thing, fleet ops and also like routes and tactical maneuvers. Like we do aim to have slower gameplay than Armada 2. We do aim to have fewer ships, but have them dying slower, more, in a way, a bit closer to a bridge commander experience, right? Like more dueling and more individual cinematic experiences instead of everything blows up in 2 seconds.
Yeah, those paper ships are really, they were a nightmare. But yeah, coming slowly to an end. This is the time basically where I open the mic to you. Is there anything we missed talking about? Anything you have still on your list?
Honestly, I think we covered just about everything. I will say one thing. So I have a little side project going, which I call the community mod. And basically the deal is it's like an alternate version of tactical maneuvers that comes with it. You change it in the tech tree options. And the idea is I will add any ship that anybody wants to the game. So if there is a ship that you want, you can reach out to me and be like, hey, I want this ship. I want its stats to be something like this. Can I have that? And I will add it to the community mod, and it'll come with tactical maneuvers. It won't be in the main game, unless I really like it. But the idea is that way we could add other stuff. I don't know if I maintained it so well, because right now the only ship in it is the Prometheus class. But if people want stuff, and also if you have a ship model would be helpful, like you can just reach out and I'll put it in the game for sure, because like I love that kind of stuff.
That really sounds amazing, but for me there is the big question, what is the limit? How many ships can you include in Star Trek Armada?
Oh, there is not a limit. And that's part of it was, I talked earlier about times when I was adding features and then times when I was fixing bugs. So a while back I had to recreate my database, basically my tool that I used, like my modding tools for making the mod, and that took me like 2 years straight, followed by another 2 years of bug fixing. But now that it's done, it's actually very easy for me to add ships to this game. I think I did a video on it one time where like adding a brand new ship to the game took me like 20 minutes. So I can do it.
Not bad. Well then, let me say thank you for joining. It was really a pleasure talking to you and basically finally meeting you. I'm following your screenshot, your work for many, many moons.
Oh, well, thanks. That's awesome.
We have a suggestion in the chat. A Malon toxic battle freighter that can poison others. That would be nice, yeah?
If you get me a ship model.
Well, maybe the guys from Star Trek Online can help us there. Would be nice, definitely. But I would say that's it for this video. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the game, and of course, play the game. Until next time.